There's a line in the Festival of Light which we hear or read almost every Sunday. And it's a sequence. First, it's in the story of the little bird. And the bird is caught in tumultuous winds, and he doesn't really know how he's going to be able to make it through the tumultuous winds. And then the nature speaks to him and says, go with the flow and I'll be able to lift you. If you're fighting against it, you don't have a chance, but go with me. And so the little bird tests out the theory and finds that the wind actually, instead of plunging him to earth, lifts him up above the clouds, and he goes up above the storm. And then the story tells us that after a time, night fell. And so the bird has worked things out to the point where he can flow with the wind, but it's still daylight, and he can still see the path for himself. But then it becomes night, and now he can't tell where he's going. He doesn't have any idea where this force is taking him. And he becomes quite panic-stricken. And he cries out, "How can I fly in this darkness?" And the answer given is, "Surrender to me." And then it says, "Peace awaits you in the unknown." And then in the story it says, "And after a time, the tiny rebel surrendered. And he found the night's counsel true." In other words, the darkness had not lied to him. Even though he didn't understand it, and even by that statement, after a time, he surrendered to it. And then he found that the night had told him the truth. Well, this story about the life of Jesus, especially where we stand right now, and in the traditional story, the church is made very dark during Good Friday. And we all, as Swamiji said, pretend we don't know that Jesus was resurrected. But looking back to the time when this actually happened, and those disciples did not know where it was going to go. And they were so panicked by what happened that even Peter, who was such a stalwart disciple, lost his nerve in the face of all that was happening. And as Jesus had predicted 3 times, Peter denied that he even knew Jesus 3 times before the dawn came. And then when the dawn came by the rooster crowing, Peter came out of his fear, and from that point was very steadfast. But what happened to those disciples during that period of time, in the most profound sense, is that it became very, very dark. And thinking of it from the other side, here's Jesus who knows the whole story of his life. And when you add into this story the lost years of Jesus, the so-called lost years, when Jesus went to India and spent 18 years in India, I mean the majority of his life, he spent 18 years in India. He studied with the Himalayan masters, and then the masters sent him all over India. And among other things, he went to Puri, and he went to the Jagannath temple, and he disputed with the priests there and tried to get the priests to have a broader idea of how they interpreted their own teaching, and they rejected him. And then Jesus knew that whatever mission he had in India, he was the avatar for the Jewish people, and he had to go back. So he went, he followed the route back, the same that as he had followed it to India. He followed it back, knowing exactly where he was going and what was going to happen. And so there he is for these 3.5 years, which is a very short period of time. Now, who knows how much more is lost? How many of his disciples were with him in India? How much he talked to them? We don't know any of that. But certainly much of what was going to take place, he didn't tell them, because they would have no way of understanding it. But all the while that he was training them, he was trying to give them what they would need to be able to face when all the light was gone, and instead of panicking and running away, would be able to use that very darkness to become stronger in what they knew to be the light. And when you read the story of the Last Supper, of all of his sitting there and talking to his disciples, and it was their last time together, and he opens that evening by going to his disciples and washing their feet. He's their master. They have consider him to be the divine incarnate, however they understood that. Suddenly he's kneeling at their feet and washing their feet. He's completely confounding their whole ideas. Peter, again, always the outspoken one, says, "Lord, I can't allow you to do this." And then Jesus answers. He said, "If you don't allow this, then you are not my disciple." And then Peter says, and I'm sure everyone laughed when he said it. He said, "Well, Lord, then not only my feet, but my hands and my head. Whatever will make me your disciple, that's what I want." And then he went and he talked, and he in every way possible, he tried to make them ready. He warned Peter what was going to happen to him. He said, "I'm going where you can't follow." Peter said, "I'll follow you anywhere." Jesus said, "Oh, really?" He said, 3 times before the cock crows tomorrow morning, you will say that you didn't even know me." And Peter, of course, how could he say that to him? But all of what Jesus was doing, step by step, in every possible way, was getting them ready. So that when the darkness came, and the allegory of the bird, we hear that every week because it's so important. How can I fly in this darkness? I'm ready to trust you, Lord, as long as I can still see. And what God does with us, he just keeps pushing us. He just keeps pushing us. He just keeps pushing us. Sister Gyanamata put it this way. She said, everything has to be given up. And she said, even those things that harmed no one, and as she put it, that were mine by right. She said, even that had to be surrendered. And don't misunderstand. It's not that we need to become impoverished or anything like that. But we must rely only on the divine. In the little Sister Gyanamata, in the monologue that I know, memorized of her words, she says when she was 4 years old, her earliest memory being in this Christian church somewhere in Canada, and when the minister told us, God will not allow you to rely on anything but him. At 4 years old, Gyanamata said, I understood him perfectly. And so we save our little bits and pieces. Well, if I can just understand, if I can just see the way, if I can just put out this. And then the allegory says, it's night. I can't fly because I can't see. And the darkness itself, the voice of God from the darkness, says, surrender to me. On the other side of it is what you're looking for. And Jesus' disciples just went into a panic. Suddenly he's been taken away. He's been arrested. It looks like he's going to be crucified. They actually take him and they crucify him. I'm sure every step of the way they're looking at each other. Is this the moment? Is this the moment when the power that we know is in him? And Peter had already tried to save him with the sword. When he was first arrested, what happens? Peter pulls his sword. He's going to fight. He's not going to let his master be taken. Then Jesus says, no. And further in the Bible, the ear was cut off and Jesus picked up the ear and put it back on. Put your sword away. So here's what is Peter supposed to do? And he did what his master told him to do. He stood there and let Jesus be taken. Can you imagine how bewildering that must have been? Just to sit here and somebody comes and takes one of our number away, but we're not allowed even to fight for him? Oh, how can I fly in this darkness? And then he dies. And they take him off the cross and they put him in the tomb. And then these days pass of the Sabbath when they can't even do anything. Just think of those days. And where are you going to find the strength? There's an amazing book that Swami wrote, his last book, Love Perfected, Life Divine. It's a beautiful story, and I made an audio book out of it. And it's posted on the website because nobody would ever buy it, so we just give it away. But I did it because I so wanted to experience that story. Because it's a woman is the protagonist, and so it had to be recorded by a woman. And it's a complicated story, but she has to go through what literally in the end is trial by fire. And it's an artificially created situation with her master, but he puts her through test after test after test after test. She has no idea what's going on, but each time she's pushed absolutely in total confusion to the limit of what she can understand, and in the last moment just has to believe, that she can step into that. She's taken to a high peak and she has to throw herself literally over a precipice into the dark. And in the end, she's compelled. She knows that God is compelling her to walk through fire. She's looking at fire and she has to walk through that fire. How can I do this? And the night, the darkness itself answers you. There's a paradox in spiritual life with many spiritual people talk about. Master repudiated it at the end. Come to me as sorrow. At the end, Master said, I've had too much sorrow. I can't invite God to send me more. Come to me as sorrow, because then I will be thinking of you all the time. And that's why the darkness comes, because then we have to cling so much harder. If we can see, and if we're in command, and if it's all going our way, sometimes we forget. But when that darkness comes, then we have to find out, what am I relying upon? And how much faith do I really have? I don't have the courage to pray for sorrow. But many times, even just contemplating the story of Jesus, if I were a disciple and I saw him taken, what would I do? What would I believe? What would I trust? How would I decide? Very interestingly, you all know that the last few weeks I spent with Tushti while she was leaving this world, and my part of her transition was together we sort of unraveled, attachments, misunderstandings, and we were sort of a lot of us around, and we took turns kind of taking care of her, and then there were just moments when you would sort of know it was your turn. And she found herself, because it seemed that she would exit her body almost 10 or 12 days before she actually did. And there was a period of time when she was ready to depart and would go very far away, but would always come back. And it was confusing her, as best as I can understand. Communication wasn't, much of it was intuitive, so you had to, few words, a little bit of vocabulary, but also intuition. And it was, she sort of asked a question that was not dissimilar to what Paula asked when Paula was dying, and many of you know about how consciously Paula died. And Paula also was sort of saying, this isn't as easy as I thought it would be. And I was thinking about that. Master has a Maha Samadhi, which means that's his final experience of samadhi. And in that one, he doesn't return. So the implication of that, obviously, is that he goes into that state regularly, but he always comes back. And the master can stop his breath, he can stop his heart, he can completely control the physical body. Masters can be buried alive for long periods of time and still come out of it because they have complete mastery over their physical processes. So for Master to stop his heart, as he did on March 7th, 1952, he stopped his heart. He finished the poem, stopped his heart, and went into Mahasamadhi, which is he left and he didn't come back. But unless we go there and come back and go there and come back, we don't necessarily know how to go there and not come back. And especially for us on our path, where we're sevakas. We do a lot of service, and a lot of our spiritual development comes through our attunement and our selfless service. And it isn't given to us, to most of us. Some it is given to, but to many of us it's not given that we exclusively just cultivate that capacity. So Tushti is there, and very seriously, it's like, do you know how to do this? And I said, no, I don't remember either. I said, but I think you'll know when you need to know. And what you could see in that moment was everybody's best qualities, everybody's faults are usually their best qualities taken a little too far. Tremendous willpower she has, tremendous capacity to set her mind and do it. So what am I supposed to set my mind on, and how am I supposed to do it? And it occurred to me, as it did during those weeks, many things just occurred to me, and I trusted them. I said, how can I fly in this darkness? There we are every week. How can I fly in this darkness? Surrender to me. Peace awaits you in the unknown. Even in such a moment, how do I know? And I really don't know, because I couldn't enter her consciousness, whether that was even relevant, what to speak of helpful. But in the moment it seemed to answer, and we went forward from there. But I think about that. How often are we thinking ourselves filled with faith, but really are just still in control? And you think about really horrific things that happen. I recently was reading a very interesting book that involved the Second World War and all that happened to the Jews, and how completely they lost control of everything. You know, in such a moment, surrender to me. Peace awaits you in the unknown. So there were the disciples, and it has to be said, the apostles passed the test, and the way Swami describes it, it's so sweet, and it's on Easter morning. He said, after, they didn't know what was going on, but they came together. Which is to say, they didn't know what had happened and what was going to happen, but they knew that the answer lay with one another. You see, they were the Master's children, and by coming back to each other, you see, they were coming back to their faith in Jesus, and it was when they were gathered together that he appeared resurrected. How powerful that is, isn't it? Imagine they were there together. What were they talking about before he was resurrected? What were they doing? I'm sure they were trying to find their way in faith through the darkness. And because of that, he was able to reach them. In our own lives, when that moment comes, how can I go on? I don't have the strength, I don't have the creativity, I don't have the will, I don't have the physical energy, I don't have the wisdom. How can I fly in this darkness? Surrender to me. Peace awaits you in the unknown. And after a time, how long a time? That's for the soul to decide, each one of us. The tiny rebel surrendered, and he found the knight's counsel was true.